Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today, we're going to be tackling a real mind bender, Thus Spake Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. You know, the one with the prophet hanging out in the mountains for like a decade
Oh, yeah.
and then coming down to like drop some serious truth bombs on humanity?
It's definitely not your average beach rid, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But it's packed with ideas that still resonate today, even if they were, pretty radical back in Nietzsche's time.
All right, so before we get too deep, can you give us like the quick and dirty summary?
Mm-hmm.
What are the big themes Nietzsche's trying to get across in Thus Spake Zarathustra?
Sure. So at its heart, the book really explores the implications of a world without God, where traditional morality no longer holds sway. Nietzsche challenges us to create our own values, to embrace the will to power as a driving force for self-realization, and to strive for the ideal of the Superman, a being who transcends conventional limitations. Oh, and did I mention the concept of eternal recurrence, where everything that has happened will happen again and again infinitely?
Yeah, we're definitely going to unpack that one later. But first, let's walk through Zarathustra's journey. He spends 10 years up in the mountains, basically becoming a philosophical hermit. And then he suddenly decides it's time to share his wisdom with the world. What's the deal with that?
Well, remember that famous line, man is something that must be surpassed. Zarathustra feels this intense urge to awaken humanity to its potential, to push us beyond our current limitations. He's like a prophet with a message that he just can't keep to himself anymore.
Okay, but let's be real. Isn't the whole Superman thing a bit, super intimidating? Like, are we all supposed to become Nietzschean superheroes or something?
Not exactly. Think of the Superman more as a metaphor for human potential. It's about constantly striving to become the best version of ourselves, to embrace our strengths and to create new values that are life-affirming and empowering.
So it's not about physical strength or superpowers, but more about a kind of inner strength and self-mastery.
Exactly. It's about pushing your own boundaries, embracing challenges, and constantly evolving. And this ties directly into Nietzsche's concept of the will to power.
Uh-huh. Back to the will to power. I'm guessing it's not just about dominating others, right?
Yeah.
Because that sounds kind of, power hungry.
Right. Nietzsche's not advocating for some kind of tyrannical power grab. The will to power is more about a fundamental life force, a drive for growth, creativity, and self-expression. It's the energy that pushes us to overcome obstacles and achieve our full potential.
So it's like the will to power could be channeled into creating art, starting a business, or even just overcoming a personal challenge.
Absolutely. It's the force that drives us to leave our comfort zones and reach for something more. And this connects to another big idea in the book, the transvaluation of all values.
Okay, now we're getting into the really heady stuff.
Oh.
What exactly does Nietzsche mean by that? Yeah, it sounds like he's about to throw out all the rule books.
He pretty much is. Nietzsche argues that traditional morality, especially Christian morality, has become stagnant and life-denying. He believes it's time to reevaluate our values and create a new system, one based on strength, creativity, and self-affirmation.
So he's not saying anything goes, but rather, let's question the values we've inherited and see if they actually serve us.
Exactly. It's about questioning assumptions, breaking free from outdated dogmas, and crafting a more authentic way of living. And Zarathustra embodies this spirit of questioning and challenging conventional wisdom.
And he does this through all these crazy encounters he has, right? Like the dude meets a tightrope walker who falls to his death, argues with a bunch of academics about the meaning of life, and even has a conversation with his own shadow.
Each of these encounters represents a different aspect of human experience, and they all force Zarathustra to confront his own beliefs and to refine his message. Remember that passage, "What is the greatest thing ye can experience? It is the hour of great contempt." Well, Zarathustra experiences a lot of contempt, but he also experiences moments of great joy and affirmation.
That's what makes this book so fascinating. Right? It's not a straightforward set of instructions on how to live, but rather an invitation to engage in a deep and often unsettling dialogue about the big questions of life.
It's a journey of self-discovery, not just for Zarathustra, but for the reader as well.
And on that note, let's take a quick break before we dive into the next part of Zarathustra's journey.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready for another dose of Nietzschean wisdom.
All right, we'll be back in a flash. Don't go anywhere.
So we left off with Zarathustra heading back to his cave after his first attempt to share his wisdom with the world. He's kind of disillusioned, right? People just weren't ready for his radical message.
Yeah, it's like he went out expecting to, spark a philosophical revolution. And instead, he mostly got blank stares and a few rotten tomatoes thrown his way.
But even though he retreats back to solitude, Zarathustra doesn't give up on his mission. He's constantly reflecting on his experiences and refining his ideas and preparing for the next stage of his journey.
And it's in this period of reflection that he has some of the most profound and like mind-bending encounters, right? Like the one with the child holding a mirror. What was Nietzsche getting at with that?
Well, the child represents a state of pure innocence and potential, unburdened by the weight of, past experiences or societal expectations. The mirror symbolizes self-reflection and the need to confront our true selves. It's a reminder that the journey to becoming the Superman starts with self-knowledge and a willingness to face our own shadows.
So even Zarathustra, this prophet who's supposed to have all the answers, is still on a journey of self-discovery. He's not some finished product, but a work in progress.
Exactly. And that's a really important point. Nietzsche's philosophy is not about achieving some fixed state of perfection. It's about constant growth, evolution, and self-overcoming.
And sometimes that self-overcoming involves confronting some pretty unpleasant truths about ourselves, like in the encounter with the ugliest man, which is honestly one of the most disturbing parts of the book.
It's definitely not for the faint of heart. But the ugliness that Zarathustra encounters isn't just physical. It's a representation of the darkest aspects of human nature, the potential for cruelty, suffering, and self-destruction.
So it's like Nietzsche's saying, hey, if you want to become the Superman, you can't just focus on the shiny, happy stuff. You have to confront the shadow side, the things we'd rather not see in ourselves and in the world.
Precisely. It's about embracing the totality of existence, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly. And it's through this confrontation with the darkness that Zarathustra, and by extension the reader, can achieve a more complete understanding of themselves.
But isn't there a danger in romanticizing suffering? Like, oh, I just have to embrace my inner ugliness, and then I'll become some kind of Übermensch.
That's a great question, and it's important to remember that Nietzsche is not advocating for some kind of masochistic wallowing in pain. He's saying that suffering is an inevitable part of life, and it's through confronting and overcoming challenges that we develop strength, resilience, and depth of character.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about learning from our struggles, not glorifying them. And speaking of challenges, Zarathustra has a lot to say about the dangers of conformity and resentment, like in that chapter on the tarantulas, where he basically goes on a rant against those who preach equality and try to drag everyone down to lowest common denominator.
What Nietzsche's critiquing here is the mentality that seeks to stifle individuality and excellence in the name of some kind of forced equality. He believes that true strength and creativity often arise from a place of difference, of nonconformity.
So it's not about putting others down, but about recognizing that everyone has unique talents and potential, and that society should encourage individuals to cultivate those strengths, even if it means standing out from the crowd.
Exactly. And this ties back to his concept of the will to power as a drive for self-realization, not domination.
And all of this is happening in the context of a world where God is dead, as Zarathustra famously declares. That's a pretty heavy concept to grapple with, even now, let alone in Nietzsche's time.
It's a statement that has been endlessly debated and misinterpreted. It's not a literal claim about a deity's demise, but rather a recognition of the decline of traditional religious belief and the values associated with it.
So it's more about the loss of a moral framework, a sense of ultimate meaning and purpose that was traditionally provided by religion. And Nietzsche seems to be both excited and terrified by this prospect.
Exactly. On the one hand, it's liberating. It frees us from the constraints of dogma and blind faith. But on the other hand, it's terrifying because it forces us to confront the responsibility of creating our own values and finding meaning in a world without divine guidance.
That's a lot of pressure. No wonder Zarathustra spent so much time wandering around trying to figure things out. But speaking of figuring things out, we haven't even touched on the concept of eternal recurrence, which seems to be this looming presence throughout the book.
That's because it's a concept that builds slowly, like a musical theme that keeps recurring and evolving throughout a symphony. And it's in the final parts of the book where it really comes to the forefront and takes on its most profound significance.
Okay, I'm officially intrigued. Let's jump into the final parts of Zarathustra's journey, because I have a feeling things are about to get really interesting. All right, so we're back and ready to tackle the final parts of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where, if I'm understanding this right, things get really real for our mountain-dwelling philosopher.
Yeah, you could say that. In these last sections, Zarathustra's journey becomes less about preaching to others and more about confronting his own doubts and limitations. It's like he's putting his own philosophy to the ultimate test.
And this plays out in his encounters with the higher men, right? These folks are supposed to be like the embodiment of his ideals, but it seems like they're more messed up than anyone else he's met.
That's the irony. They represent the potential for greatness. But they're also deeply flawed, vulnerable to the temptations of power, isolation, and despair. Think of it like this. They've grasped the idea of the Superman intellectually, but they haven't truly integrated it into their being.
So it's like they're playing the part of the Superman without actually doing the inner work required to become one. And that whole scene where they're worshiping an ass, what was that about?
Oh man, it's classic Nietzsche, using satire to expose the absurdity of blind faith. Whether it's in a deity, an ideology, or even a charismatic leader, it's like he's saying, hey, even the smartest people can fall prey to herd mentality and lose sight of their own individuality.
I'm guessing Zarathustra doesn't exactly handle this whole ass-worshipping situation with grace and understanding.
He's definitely challenged by it. Remember, Zarathustra is still on his own journey. He's wrestling with his role as a teacher, questioning his own certainty, and ultimately realizing that the path to the Superman is not about imposing his will on others, but about empowering them to find their own way.
So it's less about being a prophet with all the answers, and more about being a guide who points the way, but lets others walk the path themselves.
Exactly. And this ties back to that idea of self-reliance that Nietzsche emphasizes throughout the book. He's constantly reminding us that we are responsible for creating our own values, for finding our own meaning, for becoming our own lawgivers, as he puts it.
Okay, but how do we actually do that?
Hmm.
Especially when we're facing those big existential questions that Nietzsche keeps throwing at us, like the whole eternal recurrence thing. I mean, the idea that we're going to live the same life over and over again for all eternity is both mind-blowing and kind of terrifying.
It's definitely a concept that takes some getting used to, but for Nietzsche, it's not about fatalism or resignation. It's actually a call to action, an invitation to live a life so full, so meaningful, that we would willingly embrace it, even if we had to experience it an infinite number of times.
So it's like a test. Could you say yes to your life, knowing you'd have to live it again and again, with all its joys and sorrows?
Exactly. And this leads to the concept of amor fati, the love of fate. It's about accepting everything that has happened, both good and bad, as essential to who we are and where we're going. It's about finding beauty, even in the seemingly ugly or tragic aspects of existence.
It's a tall order, that's for sure. But when you put it that way, it's also incredibly empowering. It's like Nietzsche saying, don't waste your energy wishing things were different. Embrace the totality of your experience and make something beautiful out of it.
And that, I think, is the ultimate takeaway from Thus Spake Zarathustra. It's a call to awaken to the fullness of life, to embrace its challenges and joys, and to strive for greatness even in the face of absurdity. It's a book that can shake you to your core, make you question everything you thought you knew, and ultimately inspire you to create a life worthy of being lived, not just once, but an infinite number of times.
Wow, that's quite a journey we've been on. Thanks for guiding us through the twists and turns of Nietzsche's mind. I think we've all earned a mental break after this deep dive.
I second that. But hey, maybe that's part of the point. Nietzsche's work is not meant to be passively absorbed. It's meant to challenge us, provoke us, and ultimately push us to create our own meaning in a world that often seems devoid of it.
Yeah. So to all our listeners out there, go forth and embrace the challenge. Question everything. Create your own values. And strive for the Superman within you. And if you ever feel lost or confused, well, there's always Thus Spake Zarathustra, waiting to spark a new philosophical adventure. Thanks for joining us on Books and Bytes. Until next time.